Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the 9 Inch Nails Retrospective, where my friend Luke and I talk about the biggest and best band in industrial rock music. And last time you saw us, we had a joint venture as we covered the many soundtracks of Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross and did a cursory go over of Year Zero, an album this channel has talked about in the past. But we re-examined one last time just to see where we were in the overall hierarchy of this arc of the phase of 9 Inch Nails. And we had to take a little bit of a break there for a second, but naturally, since the curse of this channel covering every single retrospective, every artist we cover will ultimately come up with a release at the end of our retrospectives because this has happened every single time. We need to only do retrospectives on active bands to keep this trend to continue going, I guess. But we are going to sort of be covering the new 9 Inch Noise album this next week on the podcast with Jen, but we still have some missing links to attend to. These last two big bona fide 9 Inch Nails albums. And we are covering today 2008's The Slip. And if one had to pick out of a lineup what the least talked about 9 Inch Nails album is, I think that it's pretty commonly, universally considered The Slip. Not even really because this is deemed a lesser album, which it kind of is, but is more just considered in a run of records that people do not see as being like the big commercial side of this band. Again, we kind of talked about how the soundtracks had kind of subsumed this project in a very strange way, despite the fact that they weren't being released under the 9 Inch Nails name. But what was being released at the time was some stuff that was continuing in the same direction that albums like Year Zero were in. Luke and I have been talking about the increasing prevalence of the heavy electronic side of this band, which has been there since day one. But as we've gone on, the presence of digital instrumentation has gone more and more to the extremes, and I think we kind of find it at its pinnacle with this band on The Slip. This is an interesting album for a couple of reasons, mainly because this is the album that finished his contractual obligation to Interscope Records, and he had formally announced that he was not going to be working with the company any longer. He also revealed that 9 Inch Nails are likely going to distribute any future material independently via their own various venues. This was immediately what came after this was the Ghosts 1 through 4 independent, free to utilize project that we kind of mentioned on the independent record label The Null Corporation, which is what the albums after this are going to be released on. And he wanted to get back to writing as soon as Ghosts came out, and it was recorded in 3 weeks of studio time at Trent's house. The album was, in fact, engineered by Atticus Ross and mixed by longtime collaborator Alan Moulder, who, as we talked about, big part of the band's early sound, also did a lot of work for bands like the Smashing Pumpkins in the 90s. And it was initially intended to be an EP. Remember that because it's kind of gonna become a theme from here on out. But
Yeah.
some instrumental performances were contributed by live band members like John Freese or Robin Fnick, though they did not participate in the songwriting process. That was all Trent. During these sessions, Reznor actually sent the album, the first and only single, Discipline, to radio stations before the remainder of the album was even completed, and less than 24 hours, funnily enough, after the track had been mastered. So this was in the midst of a creative frenzy that Trent was in as he was breaking away from his old label, pursuing soundtrack stuff, and just like more stuff was coming out of Trent Reznor than has ever come out before, and he's never not been prolific. So here we are at this weird joint venture at the middle, the center of everything, And not to be anticlimactic, but yeah, I can't really say that I'm breaking away from the consensus when I say that this is probably my least favorite Nine Inch Nails album, but it's not without its merits. Luke, what do you think about The Slip, the album that has occupied the least amount of the cultural consciousness when it comes to Nine Inch Nails as a band? This is an often overlooked record. Like, I often see people even forget that it came out and go directly from year zero to Hesitation Mark. So, why do you think that might be the case, and how does that inform your particular perspective on this record? Just because I don't know what it is, but I am coming into this a little lukewarm. Thankfully, I've got a couple of reasons as to why.
Well, for one, I do think it is very funny that the album that became the most sort of like forgotten obscure is literally called The Slip. They
Yeah, right.
literally
It's a
pulled the
little
slip on us,
self-damning, you know?
which maybe I don't know, maybe they knew, but who knows? But to me, it's kind of interesting because I think I was of a similar feeling for a long while before doing this podcast
Hmm.
of being in that territory. And the reason is something that I don't really think explains why it maybe became obscure around the time of its release. But to me, it's like weirdly enough, I kind of misremembered this and like hesitation marks a lot.
Hmm.
Like there's some instances where I think like certain songs that were on hesitation marks were actually on the slip, and then the slip were actually songs that were on hesitation marks. So it's like it's one of those things of when you have an era where it's not as every project has like the same sort of like esteem as like, you know, the era of the downward spiral and to with teeth and so on and so forth,
Hmm.
that like some of it kind of does mesh together in a way, and not in like a sense like the songs do necessarily, but just there I don't think there is as much of a specific goal with each album as it was when it was year zero or was with teeth and that sort of thing. So I think that's probably at least my interpretation as to why this one kind of falls by the wayside a lot. For me, it's kind of interesting though, because when we were originally going to do this podcast a little while back, when I listened to it, I kind of felt the same way where I was sort of, it's all right. It's not anything great. But for some reason this time around I've found myself enjoying it a lot more. But I will say it is hearing that it was like done in like 3 weeks and it was basically like this almost hashed together kind of scramble to make this thing. It makes a lot more sense why it is the way it is. It's kind of collection of really good singles, but not something that works really well as an album, probably is the best way I could describe it.
That is honest to God, more or less my exact thesis on it. And you know, I want to issue the notion of like, you do not need to make an album does not require months or years of work in order to be great. Like, think about your favorite punk albums right now, person listening to this. More often than not is the case, your favorite punk albums were probably recorded in a weekend. Like the idea that time is directly translated into quality when it comes to music is a misnomer. Now, it does tend to favor people who spend long amounts of time making their music to make good music, but it is not always definitively the case. So let's, for the sake of argument, try to, when talking about this record, eschew the idea that it was rushed and instead try to talk about it as though every result here is the result of artistic intent, just
Yeah.
as an exercise, just to make things fun. Because frankly, it's like the most difficult critical linchpin to stick yourself to when it's just like, just they just didn't have enough time. And that very well might be the case. This could have been a complete rush job that Trent did not try super hard on. But if we look past that and see what this album is instead, I feel like we do get a little bit better of a look at it. The sort of overwhelming idea I see with the slip is that it is an idea of aesthetics. We've talked about the way that Nine Inch Nails' sound has kind of evolved over the years. And at this point, this is Nine Inch Nails at their most digital. And I wish that I could cite something else as being the thing that makes or breaks this album for me, but unfortunately, it is kind of just how digital the album ends up sounding that ends up kind of rubbing me the wrong way. Because, I mean, look, I listen to a ton of music that is just 90% not analog instruments. I am no stranger to listening to shit where people made the entire goddamn thing on a soundboard on or in GarageBand. Like one of my favorite albums of all time is Death Consciousness. Half of that album was made with free like plug-in effects and shit. So really my problem with the slip is how it's kind of a lack of dynamism, I guess. Like when you get the opening song on here, the proper opening one, 1 million, there is a kind of driving pulse to the song that does work. The guitar, on the other hand, is so digitized and laden with effects, it kind of sounds whiny. It sounds a little too high pitched in this mix, and it just kind of serrates it to the point where I'm like, it's not that this doesn't work. I think this is an all right song. I enjoy it plenty. But it's also just kind of these two really distinct ideas abrasively rubbing against each other. And it's like, okay, this is something, but it's not doing a whole lot for me. And that kind of
Yeah.
extends into songs like Letting You and songs like Echoplex, where it's just, again, the digital cloud of these mixes is just a little bit indiscernible. It's a little bit monochromatic. There's not a lot of color in this album. There isn't a lot of space. It's a very compressed record. And, that has its benefits and drawbacks, like we talked about on Year Zero. But on here, it doesn't really have another mode to lean into other than letting some of its tracks relax in the second half. But on the first half, it is so kind of aggressive that you're just kind of waiting to have an in that only shows up sometimes. Because on the other hand, Discipline, the lead single on here, I think is great. Like, it does
Yeah.
sound in concert with everything else, but I think it's everything in this record working to a uniformity and with a rhythm that sounds really, really kinetic and really fun. And that kind of juxtaposes against something like Echoplex, which just the drum machine in this is so static and so robotic. You're just kind of like, it's kind of hard to get swept up in the momentum of this song. It's very rigid.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think the rigidity is kind of the biggest drawback here because
Yeah.
something that I think about is when I was listening to this, even when the instrument being used is not percussion, everything kind of just sounds like percussion in some way.
Yes.
It
100%.
feels super heavy in that element of it, which, in some instances I think works pretty well, but then there's other points where it does kind of feel like it's just beating you over the head with it a bit. And I think it's just kind of a matter of when the song utilizes it in such a way where it is an organic thing rather than just sort of the what do we do? Well, default to drums.
It does kind of sound like that. And you know what? Honestly, it's sort of something that makes me miss the more amateurish drum playing on the first couple of Nine Inch Nails albums, because like we kind of talked about how the fact that Trent didn't have like formal drum training. So there's a bunch of moments on albums like The Downward Spiral where he's just being like blah 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 blah, 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 and there's not a lot of like concert to the rhythms that he's applying, but they work for the songs because he structures them around them. Here, there's just not a lot of spontaneity. It feels like everything is very railroaded, very controlled. It feels like the production is the only thing that manages to bring that unexpected edge, but it's an edge that gets duller the more they apply it over and over and over again. Like again, songs like 1 Million, or even when this album relents a little bit and you get a more ambient moment that has been like, this is probably features some of the most straight up ambient and electronic tracks since that second half of The Fragile, which I mean makes
Yeah.
sense considering what he's playing with here. But I will say, like, there's the moment that's like Lights in the Sky, which is supposed to be that sort of moment where the first half relents and you're supposed to get a spacier kind of vibe. It's still a bit too strangled. It's still a bit too doing what we've done before with songs like this. Like, it feels like this is very much a point at which Trent was like, oh, this is the point at Pretty Hate Machine in which we have the slower song now. And now we kind of throw that in there. And I will say that for as uninspired as a moment like that can feel on the whole, I tend to prefer the second half of this album because the production does not feel nearly as suffocating just because these songs, structurally speaking, they kind of bellow out. There is a sort of, that spiral outward structure is still in place. We are still working within that framework on this record. And it doesn't work as well as it has before, but it also doesn't not work. And the more we kind of pull back, the more we're able to sort of just sit in some of the atmosphere of this record, the more I find myself enjoying it. But that's still just kind of like on a song like The Four of Us Are Dying. I'm just I'm just not even really sure what I'm meant to do with a song like this sometimes. Like it feels
Yeah.
so irregular, both in melody and in rhythm, that I'm just kind of at a loss as how to even process it. Like I think I come down being in favor of it, but I'm also just kind of like, boy, this album's pacing is really fucking strange, man.
It's a very
It's a very
weird thing.
stop-start album. It's like very
Yeah.
like fast, 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 slow. Fast, 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 slow. And it's very like, okay.
Yeah, I think for me, like the thing with this album is probably that like the pendulum doesn't swing in any middle ground. It's either one or the other, and it's just
Yes.
all the way in that direction. And sometimes I can kind of get into that because I think there are some moments in here where like it really ramps up like this just weirdly kinetic energy in a way that like I don't think some other Nine Inch Nails songs have gone as fast for. But then there's also just points where it doesn't hit the same way, so it's very it's trying to amp you up really, really hard, and you kind of feel almost when you have like a bit too much coffee, but it doesn't actually wake you up, you just feel like jittery.
Ooh, that's such a good comparison. I both completely get what you're saying and completely agree with you. It does kind of feel like these mixes act kind of as shackles to these song structures where it's just like some more muscular instrumentation really would get those, it would get the blood pumping. It would get you to move around a little bit. But instead, it's very flat sounding. Like there's a lot of texture when it comes to the digitization of the instruments, but the actual like compositions of these songs feel just a little bit lacking. Like honestly, weirdly a little more sedate than the soundtrack work that was coming out at the time. Like, you compare
Yeah.
the stuff on here to like Hand Covers Bruise, and it's like, yeah, that song is kind of more animated in a weird way, even though it's way more explicitly ambient and not rock music.
Yeah, and even like the ambient stuff is kind of weird because I do generally like them, but there's also
Yes,
these very weird touches that I would almost describe as kind of like it almost feels like a joke version of the ambient version. Like I think it was on the end of Corona Radiata where there's
yes.
literally just like sampled stock cat sound effects just
Yes, I
vibing
was
at
so
the
weirded
end.
out by that choice. I was just kind of like, and it was like a stock cat sound
It
effect.
was very like I have heard that in like cartoons at one point.
Movies. Yeah, I thought the exact same thing, and it was weird because Corona Radiata was like, I was really with that song for the most part. I was like, okay, this is a bit spacier. We're actually like pushing at the boundaries of the album. It still is one of my preferred moments, but it does weirdly kind of just end the vibe in a very odd way at the end, especially as the transition into The Four of Us Are Dying is it's a part on the album that I'm not sure if I find it compelling because it doesn't know what's going on or because I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, maybe both even.
Could be. It's also in the problem that if you take away the opener on here, which is the lead into 1 million, you have 9 songs and this is 40 minutes long. Meaning
Mhm.
that each of these are a very significant chunk. So those slower moments, they feel slower. Those faster moments, even if they're the same length, feel faster. So
Mhm.
all of this album's problems, it kind of makes worse for itself. It's in a very weird space where I can sort of understand wanting to push the digital aesthetic to its logical extreme. And we've really like, this is kind of the limit here. This is where I think that like if Trent went past this, it would be borderline avant-garde.
Yeah.
But I'm glad that he recognized that he was going too far. It seemed like he was trying to grow vertically when that wasn't possible anymore. And then once he got to the soundtracks and he got to play with the different sounds a little bit, he got to do the growing horizontally thing that I'm a much bigger fan of, where he gets to make himself way more versatile and starts making stuff that feels more spiritually aligned with Nine Inch Nails, even though it's not under the band's name anymore. It's a like
Yeah.
Watchmen, for example, is a score that I feel like if you labeled it under the Nine Inch Nails name, like the Tron Ares soundtrack, I mean, frankly, it sounds more like Nine Inch Nails than the Tron Ares soundtrack does at times. So you're
Yeah.
like, huh, does that even like matter anymore? And I at this stage specifically, not really.
It's in a weird spot where it's kind of like the label works well as for like people who aren't super knowledgeable about who the actual people who are in the band are. So
Mhm.
if it's like, oh, I want to listen to Nine Inch Nails, but I don't actually know who Trent Reznor is, then it's like, yeah, that has the brand recognition behind it. But I think, most people who like Nine Inch Nails would know who Trent Reznor is at this point. So it's like, why bother? But who knows?
I guess at the end of the day, that's just kind of what the slip is that it just sort of feels like something that comes as a result of inevitability rather than spontaneous creativity. Trent was burning the candle at both ends. He was sober at this point, so he was obviously filling that time with work. And I think at some point it just became very difficult not to repeat ideas, just because that was kind of already something we were seeing on Year Zero. It's just that Year Zero anchored itself to having a structural and narrative bent to it. So he was able to kind of work around the self-imposed limitations. Whereas here, there's not really that much of a concept or much of a narrative, and even the songwriting itself is very Nine Inch Nails type beat. I don't really dislike anything on here. I think Trent's penchant for
Yeah.
hook writing is still very solid, and I think that these have some memorable stanzas and what have you, but they don't leap out to me as being particularly emotionally evocative, like there are moments on albums either side of this that I do think really capture that emotionality very well. Like Year Zero has those moments where it conveys the confusion and desperation of its main character, and I think Hesitation Marks does a good job at making Nine Inch Nails a little bit more lively again. This, on the
Mhm.
other hand, it's a bit of an awkward middle ground. It feels like a compromise that came from the result of pursuing an extreme, which I still think is
Yeah.
respectable. I'm glad we have this album just to see what it
Yeah.
sounds like, but I think that it occupies the place that it should in Nine Inch Nails' discography as being a this is something that some fans dig a little bit more than most people, and that, you should probably check it out after you're done with the core stuff. But if you skip out on the slip, I can't necessarily blame you that much. There's nothing here, even stuff like Discipline, which is like far and away my favorite track on here. I don't think that that's giving you something that the band hasn't really done already. It is more of the
Yeah.
Nine Inch Nails you love in a slightly different coat of paint. And yeah, it's different, it's nice, but not quite enough to get me over the finish line entirely. It just
Yeah.
lacks a bit, you know?
It feels like to me it is the kind of how do I describe this? I don't even mean this as like a negative necessarily, but it kind of feels like store brand Nine Inch Nails at certain points where it is like it is the exact kind of thing that you would expect it to be. And that's the thing is like when I say the exact kind of thing you expect it to be, I still think that
Good.
means good, but it is also just
Look,
very
I will
stuck
get
in
the great
itself.
value brand if it's cheaper and I don't care because most of that stuff is the same
Yeah,
stuff.
like
So
like
sometimes not an inherent like bad thing.
yeah, like I was gonna say for a good example is like you kind of talked a little bit about Echoplex, but sometimes I kind of do return to Echoplex as almost like Nine Inch Nails junk food.
A little bit. It definitely feels more frivolous. And I think the ultimate contradiction of the slip at the end of the day really is that it is that weird middle ground. It is that kind of Nine Inch Nails, but a little bit extra. But it's also like the most abrasive sounding album in the entire discography. Like it is the most
Yeah,
aggressively jagged sounding thing that isn't the Broken EP. So I think that
yeah,
might be why, is that it's just from all fronts, it is simply just the thing in which that Trent made where all of his instincts seem to solidify the least. So we have some things, but not other things that we typically expect with a Nine Inch Nails album. The flow is here, but it's not strong. The sound is here, but it's not super dynamic. There's always just a little tiny problem with everything. So frankly, it kind of feels like a well manicured B-sides album from like a particular moment in the band. And
yeah.
if you want to enjoy it as such, I would. I do enjoy the record, but it's more of a like, yeah, this is good. It's not really something I return to, you know?
Yeah, I the jaggedness is something I kind of thought about too, especially with like just how much I noticed percussion was sort of like a really prevalent thing in this. I think
Mhm.
I put a note at the end of Letting You that said evil alarm clock, and then head down I wrote something along the lines of hydraulic press type beat, but I don't
Yep.
remember specifically like what I meant by that.
I mean, this is a very industrial sounding album. It just doesn't quite have the impact of like, when you talk about industrial music, when we talked about it when this started, we think of machinery and pistons and factories and dirty fucking metal. And this
Yeah.
is very weightless in a way that
Yeah.
isn't. And again, that's not inherently a bad thing. It's just it's gonna give you something different and you need to adjust your expectations accordingly.
I think my thing is it's a lot of noise without intentionality, which I like noise
Mhm.
sometimes, but also like the thing is that audio experience still needs to be kind of manufactured in a way where it's like you get something out of the noise.
No, definitely. Like, if I'm being perfectly honest, I kind of prefer something like the Ghosts project that came out at the exact same time because it's a little bit more successful as ambient electronic music. Like, there are several pieces
Mhm.
that stand out to me and that I'm like, oh, I really like this motif or I really like this idea. And it feels like it's simple because it's ambient music and it's a lot quieter and the dynamics inherently aren't super intense, but it feels like there's more layers to what's happening. I'm a bit more engaged in that listening experience. So it's really the slip. I wouldn't even really think of this as an album. I just sort of put together all of the Nine Inch Nails that was being made at the time from like 2007 to 2012 is just kind of this period with a shitload of music that just happens to be on a bunch of different albums.
Like it's very much an amalgamation, and I think that's kind of telling in one of the songs on here, 1 Million, actually,
Mhm.
was one of the songs that I actually knew before listening to the album firsthand. And the reason for that was it was used as a boss battle theme in a video game called Hi-Fi Rush, which, if people don't know about that,
Oh, holy fuck, yeah, I've played this. I played the boss fight in which this is used in. I
yeah.
completely forgot about that. Oh God. You know what? And it's crazy because like it used in that game like the mix in that game is so much more dynamic because it reacts to the player character and how you follow along with the game's rhythm. So
Yeah.
there's actually a better version of this song on that game's soundtrack that I would really recommend you listen to.
And that's the point, and that's where the sort of crux of this thing is kind of interesting, is that like that song very much on its own is very kind of like
It's fine.
meat and potatoes, you
Hmm.
know?
Yes.
And so like a game like that where it's like having to actually use intentionality with the music is able to make a version of it that is a lot more impactful.
It's a bit more extra, it's got more layers, there's more happening there. It has like it can react to what you're doing a little bit more. I would love to see like this entire album remixed on that kind of level so that it give you like different phases of each of these songs because that's kind of interesting because it is the most digital sounding album, so naturally they use it for a video game. That's actually kind of nifty. But
Yeah,
yeah, so you may as well seek that out. That's probably the coolest thing that anything on this album has anything to do with. Hi-Fi Rush is a good fucking game. If you like
it's
Devil
a
May
cool game.
Cry, it's like that if it was a rhythm game.
And also if you kind of like Jet Set Radio
Y-
aesthetics.
If you like what Jet Set Radio and like Wind Waker look like, but you like playing Devil May Cry 5 and doing stylish combos and shit, but you also like rhythm games, play Hi-Fi Rush. That's where it's at.
Also, also this is like gonna be a reference nobody gets, but also a game for anyone who watched fucking Generator Rex for the 10 episodes it showed up for.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh God, so true. It is a video game for kids who watched that and Megas XLR as children.
Yes.
That's what it is. That's also a fucking great soundtrack on that show, by the way.
Yeah.
But now that we have devolved into talking about cartoons, I think that is a good signal to say that we have probably said all there is to say about the slip here. So please join us next time when we technically kind of conclude this series where we're going to talk about hesitation marks and the various releases after that, which are EPs, kind of an album, not really an album. The label says it's an album, but Trent is like, well, Bad Witch is it's its own thing.
What is
But
even album even?
yes, we will get there when we get there as we assess everything that was released after this. We will be talking about 2013's Hesitation Marks, stealthily one of my absolute favorite releases from this band, if I am being perfectly honest.
Hmm.
So get excited for that and some of the stuff afterwards. I'm honestly a really big fan of a lot of those EPs and a lot of the songs on them. So
Same here.
really, some of the best is still yet to come. And of course, I don't know what order these things are going to go out, but depending on when you are seeing this, we may have reviewed the new Nine Inch Nails Boys Noise soundtrack remix, live album, collaboration, whatever the fuck, because it's all of those things kind of by then. So everything's coming up Trent Reznor is what I'm saying. So
We love it when it's coming up, Trent.
we love it when it's coming up, Trent. Are you ready to have a bad time? KO.